Ben Wolf, thanks for joining me today on the Mechanics of Transportation. I'm here to talk about your film, Changing Lanes. It's really an incredible film for those of us in the transportation industry and transportation infrastructure, infosphere, or whatever you want to call it, just in terms of the story that you picked to talk about this one neighborhood issue that they were having, but also you managed to tell it on a broader scale, like you upped it up. Upped it. That's not even a word. You brought it to you took it local, but then you also made it national and even global. Welcome to the program, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll start before we talk about the film a little bit. Let's just hear what your story is. What's your background in transportation? And then I'll ask you why you wanted to do this film.
Sure. Well, I'm not a transportation professional or an academic. I'm a filmmaker and primarily a cinematographer who's worked on a variety of documentaries on all sorts of topics, from making pianos and watches to various artists and a concert film featuring David Byrne, which is how I knew him.
See, that was going to be one of my questions right off the bat, but we'll get into that in a minute. So,
Sure.
So go ahead.
My relationship to transportation is that, like everybody that lives in a city, I got to get around. Mm-hmm. And I've been in New York City since 1991. I've used to race bicycles. I love bicycles. And it's been one of the ways I've gotten around the city for the 30 plus years I've been here. And there's been a lot of dramatic change. It went from being, when I came here, not many people were riding bikes to get around, and it was really a fringe thing. Mm-hmm. I'd show up at a meeting with a helmet and people would be freaking out that I was a crazy person. Right. And now it's been fun watching it enter the mainstream. So it's been sort of a personal passion of mine. Basically, when my professional cinematography work slowed down during the pandemic, I had more time. I had wanted to do a project of my own for a long time, and I finally had the time, and I thought this would be an interesting thing to explore. Who's making these changes? How are these decisions being made? I wanted to make a movie that was, as you sort of noted, a microcosm for sort of bigger political things happening in our country, many of which are quite disturbing to me, and I felt like I need to somehow address this in some way.
Yeah.
That's not simply just preaching to convert.
Not just on the corner saying we need bike lanes, we need better infrastructure. It's a lot deeper than that. So in those times that you've been living in New York, you've seen obviously a lot of changes. It was just you, I think, David Byrne, and Bike Messengers. But now your infrastructure there has obviously grown tremendously. I mean, they've shut down Times Square, and created protected bike lanes. You guys have the Boroughs ride that takes place every year. Where people get to ride the boroughs, so it's a lot more highlighted. When did you start making this film, Changing Lanes? You said during the pandemic, but was that?
It was really after that. Things really got started in earnest. But I made it for about 3 years. Really, I was sort of following the story for about 3 years, from I guess probably late 2022 until mid 2025, something like that. Yeah. Which is a while, but that's not an unusual amount of time for a documentary. And in fact, the story took that, what I was following, it sort of took that long for something to sort of reach its natural sort of conclusion.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. Do you live in the neighborhood? Well, I'll ask you that in a minute, but let's give people a synopsis of what the film is about. So start with the microcosm. What drew you to this particular story, and what is it? What is the story, and what drew you to it?
Sure. So the story is about a particularly dangerous boulevard in a part of Brooklyn called Greenpoint. The name of the boulevard is McGinnis Boulevard. I actually live about 5 miles away in a different neighborhood, but it's nearby. When I got started on this idea of a movie about street safety and changes to the street, I was sort of following a bunch of different stories and trying to find, I didn't quite know what would anchor this movie. And there's a meeting that you see in the movie, a meeting that's purportedly a public meeting organized by the people that didn't want to see change to the street.
Right.
And at that meeting, in fact, essentially locked out, although they called it the public meeting, they locked out the part of the community that wanted to see the change. And I was there because it was sort of a public meeting, and I was able to film it. And that I kind of thought, okay, this is probably going to be my story, because this is so over the top. The divisions in the community are so dramatic, and with literally people, having sort of fake public meetings and locking each other out and all. I thought that this is probably going to be something to follow. And
Yeah.
so I lucked into a really great story that had some really amazing twists and turns that would have been hard to anticipate.
Yeah. And it starts with, the death of a beloved resident there, and
That's
I believe
right.
a teacher as well, which in Richmond, Virginia, we've had multiple pedestrian and cyclist deaths over the years, like everywhere across the country. And it starts with that as kind of, I think, the anchor, maybe not the meeting's kind of the anchor, but I think the anchor of the fact that there's this issue going on, which is what's going on everywhere pretty much in major cities all across the US, and starting to fight it that way. And what was going on with McGinnis is basically the town got together and said, hey, enough is enough, and started to try to fight it. And it seems like they were succeeding for quite a while in terms of, we want a protected bike lane, we want people to slow down, but then a wrench got thrown into it.
Yeah, to give a little bit more context, McGinnis Boulevard was originally a narrow residential street that in the 1950s was dramatically widened by Robert Moses. It was one of his later projects. So you go from having a residential 2-lane street to a 4-lane, something like almost like a highway that's specifically been done to connect two highways that are at each end of it, the Long Island Expressway and the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. And predictably, the result of that from the very beginning was danger to the people that actually lived in the community and had to cross this boulevard
Yeah.
So I believe in the first couple of years, the first death happened, which was a small child in the 1950s. And from the very beginning, there was a lot of resistance. By some estimates, there may have been as many as 200 deaths on this boulevard in crashes over the decades.
Wow. And let me stop you right there for 1 second. So you dive into the history of this particular boulevard. As you mentioned, it goes from 2 lanes of residential to 4 lanes. And for people out there that don't know, there's a writer named Peter Norton, who's a professor at the University of Virginia. And he has dived into this as well, where he talks about how pedestrians and cyclists, well, pedestrians mostly, were the center of getting around in major cities until cars took over. And not just cars, but it was car manufacturing. The people who built cars made tires and lobbied really hard to do this. And Moses, I'm assuming, said, well, let's get this connector so we can get, people driving quicker to get to where they need to go.
All correct. The irony is, like, when Moses did that, he wasn't doing it for the people that lived in this community. He was doing it to move people through that space, and most of that community didn't have cars then and doesn't have a car now. Something like 80% of the people in the community don't get around in cars, which is pretty typical of New York City. So, and somewhat unique in the United States that we mostly do use transit and walk and bike, but we also use cars. And that also applies to me personally. I have a van that I use for my work a lot of the time, but that's a pretty slow, frustrating, and expensive way to get around. So given a choice, I would rather take the subway, or if the weather is not freezing, jump on my bike.
It's just ironic. It's ironic too, in a way that, you're in a major city. So of course there is so many different ways to get around other than a car. So the fact that they would highlight a car when there's, subways and buses and walking and things like that is just.
Yeah. That's to me one of the biggest issues. That my film doesn't provide all the answers, but at least tries to get people thinking, like, why do we have the status quo that we have? Why did we give up all of our public space essentially to the automobile?
Right.
I just want, like, broadly speaking, to me, when I think of cities, the whole point of a city is to be in close proximity to other people and interact with them. That's the point. Otherwise, you might as well be having a Zoom call like we're having right now. There's no real reason to live in a dense place. And if you're going to fill up all the public space in your dense place with fast-moving metal boxes, it's almost undermining the whole point of living in a city, honestly.
Right.
And, I just want to say, it's not that I'm anti-car. I just don't think that they're very compatible with sort of dense urban living. It really works against the whole, what we love about cities.
Yeah. Everyone loves about a city is that you can, get out and walk, to a bodega nearby, or you could walk and hit the subway and get to downtown. And
or you can meet up with, today I walked 2 blocks to the cafe for my coffee. I sat with, every day there's a bunch of people that I know there. It's very social. Mm-hmm. Again, cars unfortunately work against a lot of that.
Yeah. So with this film too, Changing Lanes, also got some good archival footage, and not just the ones going back to the turn of the century, but you also went back enough to to hear from Mayor Bill de Blasio, and also, I don't know about Giuliani, but you had de Blasio and you had Eric Adams as well. So how did you
Sure.
decide to frame the story? Like you mentioned, you went to the meeting and you're like, oh, there's something going on here, and then highlighting the death. So how did you kind of outline the entire story as a creator and a writer? I always
Yeah. Well, I will say this is not the kind of documentary where I had some big outline from the beginning and was just it was much more an organic process of following the story where it was going, working with a great collaborator, an editor named Kristen Bai, who's a good friend of mine, who really helped me sort of structure this thing and was working on the film for the last maybe year and a half where I was still shooting. So we were constantly having conversations about what else we needed to shoot, what else we needed to obtain. I also had a archival producer named Prudence Arndt who helped find all that great archival material. I thought the history was very important because a part of, I think, the problem with with the way our politics play out is you get people that fight very strongly against change, very strongly for the status quo. And I think part of that is just not really understanding where the status quo came from and thinking that it's always been this way. And I thought it was very important to show, no, actually, like, this street has been many different things over many different times.
Mm-hmm.
It has changed when, the way people get around the city has changed. And I feel like it's changing again. And it is true that for the last 100 years, in most American cities, at least, not entirely true here, but people, cars were the primary form of transportation. The truth is, in a place like New York, whether people like it or not, people are riding bikes, people are riding e-bikes, people are riding scooters, people are walking. And I feel like it's just a matter of just general, in a democracy, the point is to give to reach reasonable compromises among the different parts of the population that are doing different things, and to just, again, it's a little, New York may be a little bit of an outlier, but if you accept the fact that here only maybe 20% of the people are driving, again, it makes zero sense that we cede 100% of this resource to 20% of the people. It just doesn't make any sense.
It kind of reminds me of the what do you call it? The pricing of people coming over through the tunnel or whatever, and then they get an extra charge for driving into the city.
Congestion pricing.
Yeah, that's congestion pricing. I'm sorry.
It's a related topic. It's saying that if you're going to things need to be paid. Things need to be. It's related though, but it is a whole other subject.
So I find it fascinating too that with the footage that you had a strong group of residents fighting for this change in the streets, and through de Blasio and Eric Adams, kind of they were almost there, but then this corporate kind of giant, a giant maybe in the neighborhood, but also kind of a big deal steps up, and the people that you just mentioned fight it because, again, it's always been this way, and you're like, not really.
So this is, besides a story about streets, this is a story about activism. This is a story about a community that, again, and there had always been some resistance to the dangers or some pushback to the danger here, but because a beloved teacher was killed in 2021, in this case, enough of the community was upset enough to really get organized and say, we're really going to make a big push really to change this thing that we've all known or that many had been very unhappy with for a long time. Right. And as often is happening in American politics, a counter group came up, and then they butted heads for several years. The group that wanted the change was called itself Make McGinnis Safe, and I believe they really were, for the most part, a grassroots campaign. A lot of it came out of the PTA at the school, the elementary school where this teacher had worked. The group
they also, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. They also relied on Families for Safe Streets, which is a really important national organization that highlights. I've done podcasts on them before, where what they do is just incredible. So sure. No, there were a number of advocacy groups that overlapped with their concerns and were helpful. Anyway, the other group that arises calls itself Keep McGinnis Moving, and they're the ones that really didn't want these changes. There's a
book I read called Doppelganger by author Naomi Klein, which I thought had a lot to say about this tendency, at least in America, where you tend to have sort of these weird mirroring things that happen. Like you can look at global warming and you'll see people say, they'll say, 95% of scientists think it's real, but the other group will say, well, our scientists say it's not real. And you just get these, and a lot of that is sort of bad faith stuff. You often have one group that's really being earnest and honest, and the other group will sort of pose to be equally rational and, and the general population end up being kind of divided and confused because they lack this sort of ability to discriminate between these two sides, which both are presenting themselves as sort of scientific or whatever. Something similar happened here where the group, I believe, I don't even think it's that debatable at this point, but the group that opposed the change, I don't want to make this simply like good guys and bad guys. I think a lot of well-intentioned people were on both sides, but the group that opposed the change, in fact, was not such a grassroots organization. It was pretty much bankrolled by a local business, some powerful people in the community that didn't want these changes, right, for whatever reason. My own personal beef, I think, I'm a small business owner myself. I have a film production company. I think business interests are important. What I object to is sort of bad faith arguments. If a local business was concerned about getting their trucks in and out, I think there's a way to be honest about that and say we need better loading zones or something. But to just start creating like fake groups that, pretending that this is the parents, they would just make a lot of arguments that, this is actually going to make things more dangerous, or we're going to have like catastrophic traffic when this is done, or things that didn't matter. Any expert was going to tell you wasn't going to happen, and in fact hasn't happened. Right. But what happens is you end up having a very confused part of the community. The people that are a little older and less engaged are unfortunately, a lot of this ends up being kind of a fight more about like identity, like it's a gentrification fight. It's like, the new people coming in and changing things versus the old people are used to a certain arrangement. Right. But I feel like those kind of arguments, it impedes like real progress because people aren't agreeing to some basic facts and the need to make things safer, which seems like that's a benefit to everybody and should be hard to argue with.
Yeah, exactly.
And another thing that I try to do in my movie is show that just objectively American cities are outliers now in how dangerous they are compared to other cities and other wealthy, developed places in the world. European cities, Japanese cities, by and large, are we have about 4 times as much injury and death here per capita as they do. And that's, to me, not acceptable. Yeah. It's simply not acceptable. And to just say, it's just the way it is, it was an accident, we can't do anything about it, is offensive. It's like, we actually have the fact that these cities, we can go to Barcelona, we can go to Copenhagen, Paris, take your pick, and see a much safer and more pleasant streetscape that's working for everybody. People are driving there, people are biking, but they're doing it in a more civilized, controlled way. That should be a model that we should try to emulate, I think. And in places we are, but it's difficult.
It's difficult and it's slow. And I think there's I don't know if it was a New Yorker cartoon or something, but it's a picture of a woman on a bike in Amsterdam on one of the bridges, and there's bikes, and she's saying something like, I love all this getting around, but when I get back home, not the same, like not the same thing. That's not the joke there, but it's that kind of story. Let's take a break. If you like the mechanics of transportation and this podcast and want to support our efforts here at Big Soap Productions, then please consider subscribing to it by clicking the link in the show notes. You could also help support it by sharing this podcast on all your social media platforms and rating it and leaving a comment in the show notes. Those actually do help. You could also send me a tip via Venmo at Ian-Stewart-82 or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Ian_Stewart. And if you're a sponsor who'd like to sponsor the show, then let me know. Thanks. Now, here's the trailer for Changing Lanes.
Friends ask me, isn't it dangerous riding around New York?
I have never seen this level of civil misbehavior. It's right in your face, and it's an affront to our dignity.
It happened overnight. A hit and run killed a man in Brooklyn. Police say the victim was crossing the street when he was hit. The driver just kept going.
Kids were arguing, saying that's not possible. He was teaching me in my classroom yesterday.
For years, we have been trying to undo the car culture, laws which favor cars and motorists regardless of what happened to people. Human life matters a lot more than cars and trucks in this city.
The NYC Department of Transportation is moving ahead with changes.
It's unfortunate that everyone feels as though you must lose so I can win. Don't cut me off.
We have a natural tendency to assume that the way things are is inevitable. That's just not true. They can change, and in some places they do.
No country has ever been wealthier than America is right now. We should expect world-class infrastructure and world-class design.
In the words of Jane Jacobs, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only when they are created by everybody.
You know, with this too, that I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, you have like I love the storytelling of this, by the way, and you have a little glimpse of hope, like here comes the solution of a bike lane, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But I want people to see this, and I'm going to ask you where people could see it. I want to ask you though about, we mentioned David Byrne, and so tell me first of all, how did you get David Byrne? You said you did a film. Tell me about that, and how I'm sure it was really easy. You're like, I'm doing this documentary on biking. He's like, I'm in.
In fact, that's sort of how it worked. I know him a bit from a documentary I shot maybe 15 years ago, a concert documentary called Ride, Rise, Roar, where I followed him around in the States and in a bit of Europe. And it was great fun. And he and his band and the dancers all brought bikes with them. And, you know, this really happens. This is really what he does is, you know, because they have all day, they're performing at night. But they do have the days, and I think they want to unwind and enjoy themselves a bit and see where they actually are before they move on to the next place. So they tend to bike from the hotel to the local museum or whatever, and you know, sort of de-stress and have a bit of do some sightseeing. He also wrote a book about cycling, The Bicycle Diaries. So anyway, when I was thinking about this movie early on, I thought he's somebody I'd like to have. Obviously, he's going to help raise the profile of the movie, which is great, but he actually is also a very astute observer of things. I think ultimately he was the perfect guy to talk about the changes that he's personally witnessed to the streets of New York, and also about other places, because he has ridden all over the world.
Yeah.
So he's a good fit.
Yeah. And then you have some other characters, you know, people, not characters, but you have people in the movie who, if you're not in the transportation realm, or you don't, you know, follow Streets blog or other things, you might not know who these are. But can you tell people some of the people that are in this movie? Particularly, there's a guy who he's kind of, I don't know how to describe him, kind of an activist in a way, that likes to take a pen to certain things on cars. And,
I mean, that's Gersh Kunstman, who's actually the editor of Streets blog.
Right.
He's a great. He's a very funny, great person. Yeah. So I try to, among other things, he provides some comic relief, but also, you know, but it's also important.
Yeah.
One of the things he does besides editing this, you know, probably the most leading website about news about streets, is he likes to draw attention to the sort of defacement of license plates, which is a thing that's happening in New York. I don't know if it's happening so much in other places.
It happens here too. I see it all the time here in the Richmond region.
Yeah, which is and it's particularly problematic here that often it turns out that it was police that were doing this, which is just shows us that something is fundamentally broken with sort of our car culture, this sort of idea that people in cars don't have to really follow the rules, or they can sort of flagrantly speed and do this thing to their license plates so that they won't get caught for speeding or for not paying tolls or whatever. Anyway, it's funny, but it's also not funny.
It's very pointed. So for people that don't know, he goes around, like he'll ride his bike around and he'll spot a car with a license plate that's been defaced purposely, not like that's old. Right. And he'll take a pen and a Sharpie and kind of put it back in, or he'll even call. I've seen episodes that he's done where he'll call parking people and say, "This guy's parked." You know,
that's right.
Spot. So
that's right.
It's stuff that kind of needs a highlight, but it is kind of comic relief in terms of the film. But it also shows a really important aspect of what other activists are doing.
That's right.
In New York as well.
That's right. I tried to highlight a few different types of activism besides the McGinnis people, but a woman, one of the original founders of Families for Safe Streets, who herself had gone through a terrible tragedy. Also, kind of a, what would I call him? George Bliss drive. Well, for one thing, he's making his own sort of street signs, trying to keep motorized vehicles out of the bike lane. A lot of this, again, to me, raises questions about our politics, because I feel like it's great that people are stepping up and doing what they have to, but to a certain extent, they're doing things that the government should be doing.
Right.
And the fact that the government isn't enforcing laws or posting the right signs or making changes to streets to keep people from being killed indicates to me that something is wrong with our politics, because this is not really debatable stuff. Like, sure, exactly how you implement these changes, we can absolutely debate. But to accept 4 times as much injury and death as just a natural state of things is morally sort of reprehensible. So, I have mixed feelings. I applaud the people doing what they can, but I'm very troubled by the fact that they have to. I assume in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, you don't have people doing most of these things because the government is doing its function, which is to make the citizens safe and make their lives pleasant. It shouldn't be so much to ask.
Exactly. Well, Ben, I've kept you, for a little while to talk about your movie, Changing Lanes, but I want to find out where people can see this and where, like what's next for you. I know you had a screening in LA. I hope that went well, but where can people watch this?
Right. There are, right now it's still playing in just festivals and kind of individual screenings at colleges and sort of civic organizations that have reached out to me and been interested in seeing it. Actually in a couple weeks, April 16th to 20th, it will have its official commercial theatrical release in Los Angeles in 4 theaters. And then within a few months after that, it should be streaming on the big platforms and be more widely available. People can follow where it's screening and when it will be streaming on the website for the film, which is Changing Lanes Doc, like documentary, Changing Lanes Doc. I keep that updated. And if somebody is in a city or town or whatever and would be interested in hosting a screening and organizing that, I would be very happy to talk, and I can be reached on that website as well. And that's happened a fair amount already. It's screened in Chicago, Toronto. It's got an upcoming screening in Milwaukee, just because people were interested in the subject matter.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah. I've been trying to get you and your film shown here in the Richmond region. So for those listening, I'm trying to get the proper, I'm not an event organizer, but I know people who know people. And so I'm trying to get it here in Richmond. So I'll keep you posted.
No, that would be great. And I'd be happy to take part in a panel, either physically or virtually, because the film does very well as sort of I find as a, conversation starter. And especially when you have some local transportation people there too, who can kind of relate it to what's going on in that particular community.
Yeah. I think that's, one reason that I enjoyed it so much is that it relates to what's going on here in the Richmond region. And when we have in our city, the same thing where, people are fighting several different pedestrian and cyclist deaths over the years. The rest of the country is going down, but our region happens to go up a little bit. We have a new Department of Transportation that has been taking on the challenges and really stepping up their awareness, or not awareness, but stepping up their campaign to combat it. But it's still a huge kind of issue. And we're part of Vision Zero, like everyone else, or like a lot of other places. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Terrific.
Yeah, but Ben, I want to thank you for coming on The Mechanics of Transportation, and I want everyone to go search out Changing Lanes. I will put a link in the show notes as well as on the YouTube channel. But
Terrific.
I hope to hear more from you, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks.
Cheers.